Okay, welcome. And we're going to kind of continue off of what we were doing with graphing. So you guys are used to being able to take that line. So if I have y equals 2x plus 1 and graph it onto a graph. And the way we've been doing that is we've been finding a data table, plugging in values, and getting those points to put onto a graph. So this one would have been 1, this would have been 3, 5, and 7. So then we were taking those points and we were putting them onto a graph. And those graphs were making straight lines. Looked like this. That looked like that. Some of them were going straight across. Some of them were going straight up and down. So we were able to get all different kinds of lines from those. Today we're going to talk about what these lines are and or what they have. So these lines all give us the slope. So the slope is the steepness of the line. So it tells us how steep the line is, how big of an incline it has. So if you like to think of a mountain, so how steep is a mountain or kind of more flat. So if you're familiar with skiing, they have different names for those, the mountains that you would ski. So there's like the green level, there's the yellow, blue, black. So black is like a really steep mountain that you would go up and down. So that's kind of what I like to think about whenever I think about slope. So the slope of a line is just the steepness of the line. So it's the rate of change. So there's so many different words for slope. One being rate of change. So the rate of change between any 2 points on a line. So that would be like this one and this one right here. So it's telling me how steep is this line. You would pick 2 points on it and you would measure that steepness there of the line. So there's so many different ways to find slope. You can find slope from a graph, you can find slope from points, you can find slope from tables, all different kinds of ways. You can find it from an equation. And we're going to talk about those different ways today. So there are different kinds of slopes, not different kinds of slopes, but different ways to find them. And the first one we're going to talk about is how to find a slope from a graph. So when you have a graph, you've got a line typically on it, and you are finding the slope of that line, which is just the difference, so like that steepness from one point to another point on your line. So I would want to pick 2 points on my line and then find that slope. So from a graph, you are simply counting. So if you can count, you can find slope from a graph. What you're going to do is you're going to find 2 points on your graph. Let's start with the pink dots. So we're going to look at the bottom pink dot first. So I always like to start from the bottom if it's possible. And the only thing here is being able to tell if that slope is going to be positive or negative, and if the numbers that you end up finding are positive or negative. So that's why I like to start from the bottom. So I'm starting here at this point, this pink dot, and I'm going to count however many places up until I'm directly across from the other pink dot. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I went up 6, which is those positive y's. These are my negatives and positives. So I went up, which would give me a positive 6. And then I'm going over, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I went over 9, and I went this way, which is also positive. So 6/9 would be my slope. So one thing that you might notice here is that your slope is rise over run. So you are rising up, so you're going to be counting up or down, and then you're going to be counting side to side. So that is how we do our slope. So it's y over x, which is kind of hard for some people to remember because it's the opposite of how we graph. So y over x, rise over run, up or down first, side to side second. So 6/9 would be my slope of this line. So then I could have found it also from the black dot. So if I would start here at this bottom one, I would count up 1, 2. So I went up 2. And then I would count over. So 1, 2, 3. And then over. So I went over 3. Both were positive because I went up, which is a positive move, and to the right, which is also a positive move. My slope would be 2/3. So you might be looking at this thinking, well, it's the same graph, it's the same line, but they have two different slopes. Well, I would need to simplify this, and when I do that, it gets simplified down to 2/3 as well. So the line is always going to have one slope. It doesn't matter what points you pick. So that's why everybody could pick different points on this graph, and it would all end up being the same slope. So it won't matter. A little cheat sheet that I like to do with these is that you heard me just say like a positive or a negative move. When you have a graph or coordinates here, your graph is set up kind of like this. So these are positive y values, these are negative y values, positive x values, and negative x values. And I just did our slope is that rise over run. So whether or not you're going up or down first, right or left. That's also going to tell you if that number is positive or negative. So if you are going up, whenever you count, it's going to be positive. If you count down, it's going to be negative. You count to the right, positive. Count to the left, negative. So if I start counting, like for instance on this one, I counted up, which would have given me a positive move, and then I counted over, which was also positive, which is why my 2/3 were both positive numbers. We will have a lot of practice with those graphs. So let's go back here. So if I have a point here, and there's my line, I would have like a line going through here. And I said I wanted to know the slope of this line. I would want to do rise over run, or that y over x. So it's that change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to start at this bottom point here. So I'm right here. Let me get a different color so you can see. So I'm right here on this point, and I'm going to count up until I'm directly across from that. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So I counted up, which is a positive move. So I'm going to say a 3. And then I'm going to count over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I went this way 5, which is also positive. My slope would be 3/5. Okay, so let's say I've got a line that looks like this. I'm not going to try to connect them yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at that bottom point. I'm going to start here. And I'm going to count up until I'm directly across from that other dot. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went up 5, which is positive. And then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here is where things are going to look a little different. I went to the left. So that would be a negative. My slope is negative 5/6. Okay, so that would be how you would find slope from a graph. You're just simply counting. So you're counting that up, that rise over run. So these are the different ways that you can find slope. This is that rise over run, that change in y over change in x. So this is kind of where we get all of our vocabulary for slope. So this would be super important to put down in your notes, by the way. So your, let me see if I can scroll up a little bit. There we go. Your slope is that rise over run. This part's really going to be important right here. These are those 3 different ways that you can find slope. You're doing that rise over run, which would be from a graph. So you're counting, you're just simply counting up and over. That change in y over change in x, the shorthand for that is a little triangle. So change in y over change in x. And then y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1, which we will talk about later. There are 4 different types of slopes. I've got 2 that are listed here. One is positive, one is negative. So you read a graph just like you would read a book. You're going to read from the left to the right. So reading a graph from left to right, if it is starting low and going up, then it is a positive slope. But if you're starting from the left and you're starting kind of up here and you're going down, then your slope is going to be negative. So I like to say you always read that just like you would read a book, a paper, words, left to right. Is it rising or is it falling? That's going to help you with that positive and negative. Also really important, you're probably going to want to put those in your notes as well. These are all 4 of our slopes. So I like to say instead of a slope of 0, I just like to call this a 0 slope. So there are 4 total different kinds. There's that positive, that negative, and then the 2 that we haven't talked about yet, which would be a 0 slope and an undefined slope. So one way that I really like to remember this is if I have a horizontal graph, I can remember that there is a horizontal line in 0. So that kind of helps me there. It's just a little shortcut. And in undefined, there is a vertical line in that first letter of undefined, which would give me that. So if you remember from the last unit, a vertical line is that problem where it looks like x equals 3. So anytime you have that x equals 3, that's going to be an undefined slope. And then that horizontal one, remember those are the equations that look like this. So like y equals 2, those are going to be 0 slopes. So those would be like that. So these would be really important to write down. If you need to, pause the video, make sure you get these in your notes so that you have all 4 types. Okay, so the next thing that we would need to know slope from is from a data table, which you guys are kind of pros at. You already know how to make them. So now we just have to figure out how can I get information from them without actually graphing all of these points. That is one way that you could do it. So if you forget kind of how to do that, how to find slope from a data table, you can always take these coordinates. So remember, these are coordinates right here. This would be like the coordinate 1, 8. This would be 4, 6, 7, 4, and 10, 2. So those are all coordinates. You could, if you wanted to, take those and put them on a graph. However, I'm too lazy. I don't really want to do extra work. So we know that slope is that change in y over the change in x. So I would just need to find that. So I'm going to start with y, since y would go on top. Don't let that confuse you, because when they put their data tables up side to side like this, their x is on top. For slope, though, you need to write it as y is on top here, that change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to start with my y's. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the difference here between 8 and 6. Well, it would be minus 2. What is the difference between 6 and 4? A minus 2. And then a 4 and a 2, minus 2. This right here is your top number then. So my change in that y is a negative 2. Then I'm going to look up here my x's. What do I do to 1 to get to 4? Well, that would be a change in 3. From 4 to 7, a change in 3. 7 to 11, a change in 3. So my bottom x value would be 3. My slope of this table would be negative 2/3. It's really not too bad. Really, it's just about being able to count, honestly. Again, so let's try this one. Remember that change in y over the change in x is how we would find slope. So I'm going to start with y. So to get from negative 8 to negative 5, I'm actually adding 3. Don't let those negatives fool you. Negative 5 to negative 2, I am adding 3 again. Negative 2 to 1, I am adding 3. So my top number of my slope is going to be 3. Then I'm going to do the same thing right here to my x. How do I get from negative 2 to negative 1? I add 1. Right here I'm adding 1. And right here I'm adding 1. Since that difference there is 1, 3 over 1 would be the slope from data tables. Okay, so you've learned 2 ways to find slope so far. We're going to look at a third. And the third way has to do with this nice little formula here. This is if you are given points. So sometimes they will just give you coordinates instead of actually giving you like a data table or like a line. So you would have to be able to look at these points and find the slope of it. So there's a couple ways you can do this. So what it's going to end up looking like is if it says, hey, find the slope between these 2 points. So if I had the point of 10, 4 and 4, 15. So it's going to say find the slope of the line that goes through these 2 points. There are a couple things you can do. They give you 2 points. You can easily get a graph, put those on the graph, and count and find your slope that way. You could also take those points and put them in to a data table. So x, y. Since I have an x and a y, I've got a 10, 4, and I've got a 4, 15. I could use a data table and find the differences here in my x's and y's and do my slope that way. Or you can use this formula. So the formula is y2 minus y1. So what I would do is I would label my coordinates, my 2 points, 1 and 2. I know that this is an x, this is a y. So what this means then is y2 simply means the second y value. So the second y value would be 15 minus the first y value, which is 4. Then I'm going to do the second x value, which is 4, minus the first x value, which is 10. 15 minus 4 would give me 11. 4 minus 10 is negative 6. My slope would be negative 11 over 6. And I could have easily found that from here too. How do I get from 10 to 4? Well, I'm subtracting 6. How do I get from 4 to 15? I'm adding 11. 11 over negative 6 again. So same thing. So there's just 2 different ways that you can do that there. And it doesn't really matter which one you want to do. I don't care which one you want to do. But now you have all of the tools to find slope from a graph, from a data table, and from coordinates now when they give them to you.